Hello my dear friends, and welcome to another episode of Europa Rediviva. Today I'd like to talk about the dismal state of Romania's economy. As you probably know, Romania has the largest budget deficit in the European Union. Romania has the biggest inflation in the European Union. Its public debt is soaring at astronomical levels. It has surpassed 60% of GDP. Romania used to be a moderately indebted country. So this public debt skyrocketed in the last 5-6 years. And all of this is a consequence of the nature of the political class. As I've said many times in my episodes, it's about the network of foreign agents that essentially dictate the public procurement process to the benefit of their foreign paymasters. So, for example, right now we have this problem in the Romanian government that there is a part of the former governmental coalition that wants to favor American procurement contracts, and there's the other one which wants to favor German procurement contracts. So essentially we have a split between on the one hand the president of Romania and the Social Democratic Party, which used to be somewhat sovereigntist until 2019, when its leader was sent to prison on bogus charges, and it has basically been taken over by agents of the Domestic Intelligence Service. And of course, this being the, let's say, deep state establishment, has allegiance to the United States through the chain of command of NATO, and therefore wants to favor American companies in essentially robbing the state budget blind. The procurement in question is, after the long list of first Bechtel, the highway that never was, and then the Pfizer vaccine procurement program, and then the Patriots, and all sorts of other weapon systems from American companies. Now Romania is the lab rat for an experimental nuclear technology developed by the United States, or maybe developed is too strong of a word. It has never proven itself to be effective, so it is still in this failed stage, prolonged failed stage, just like the mRNA vaccines were before the pandemic, before they were repurposed as genetic treatments for a viral respiratory infection. So this story with the nuclear small modular reactors, so basically submarine reactors that are repurposed for civilian use, this is a project going nowhere because it is way too expensive. Its safety profile is not known, and the energy that it produces is too little. But this is excellent for, as I said, robbing the public purse. So there was no other country interested in doing this apart from Romania. Out of all the vassals of the United States, it was only Japan that agreed to invest some money into it. Japan being a country that's militarily occupied by the United States and has been subdued with two nuclear weapons in 1945, and well, the United States still occupies Okinawa, and there's a continual military presence in Japan to ensure the loyalty of Japan to the Imperial American project. So even the Japanese were not suicidal enough to allow this project to take place on their soil. Through this agreement that they signed with the US government, they pledged to make investments in the US energy sector, and a part of this is earmarked to go to this experimental nuclear technology, but for experimentation in the United States, not in Japan, not using the Japanese population as lab rats. However, the Romanian elites decided that they are willing to go the extra mile and to be the most faithful servant of the hegemon, and to put their population on the line as well, just like they did with the experimental corona vaccines. But then it was the collective West in general that acquiesced to the procurement process of the Pfizer and Moderna and Johnson vaccines. But for this nuclear technology, experimental nuclear technology that the United States is supposedly devising, although it's probably devising it just like it devised the Bechtel highway that was never even meant to be built, it was just meant to rob the public purse. So yeah, Romania is the selected destination for this experiment to take place. And given that the other part of the mainstream political spectrum is beholden to European interests, the formerly liberal party and so the basically the agents of France and Germany in Romania decided that that money needed to go to Rheinmetall and to European arms manufacturers. So this is the origin of this conflict inside the government of Romania, which will lead to this prolonged stalemate because of Romania's feeble constitution. A no confidence vote in parliament is not automatically followed by early elections. Not even the failed designation of 2 consecutive prime ministers leads to snap elections. It's a much more complex process, which in the end depends on the will of the Romanian president. And if he decides that he does not want early elections, then there will be no early elections. And this is the main problem with the Romanian economy, because whenever your economy suffers from these macroeconomic problems, from these macroeconomic imbalances, maybe you have to do some austerity, maybe you have to do some internal devaluation. Of course, these are the measures that are advocated for by the IMF and by neoliberal economists in general. I would say probably you have to increase capital gains taxes, you have to increase royalties, you have to increase all sorts of direct and indirect taxes on the corporations and on the foreign financial capital. But that will bring you bad press in The Economist and in Financial Times, and you'll be labeled a dictator, the new Hitler that needs to be toppled, and you'll have orange revolutions and mass protests of students and so on. So yeah, that's a no-go area. If you want to tax international financial capital, then you have a colored revolution going your way. So okay, countries generally resort to internal devaluation, as it is euphemistically called. So basically austerity for the poor, cutting back on public services, cutting back on all sorts of payments, pensions, maybe taxing your population through inflation. This is also an indirect tax that you can levy. But anyway, Romania is in this structural this structural crisis, because it is not something that you can just increase taxes with and have the problem go away. This is something structural, because Romania is bound through treaties and informal agreements to allocate quite a big percentage of its GDP to some causes that are external, that do not bring benefits, that do not have returns, and that are mandatory. And they are inescapable. So it doesn't matter what kind of social crisis or economic crisis Romania plunges into. The budgetary allocation to Ukraine, for example, is mandatory. If you stop doing that, then you'll have all sorts of problems. You already have all sorts of problems with botched false flag attacks and so on. But I'm sure that Ukraine has quite a good stranglehold on the Romanian policymakers through all sorts of, threats, blackmail, the sort. Plus the very credible threat of bringing Romania into the war with the staging of a Russian attack, as it was supposed to happen in Constanța. So you have this destination that is mandatory, the destination of Ukraine. Then you have the NATO and the European Union weapons procurement programs. And again, your so-called external partners have a lot of levy on you, and they can orchestrate all sorts of things. These people that are tolerated at the forefront of Romanian politics are corrupt to a large extent, but they are tolerated exactly because they are maneuverable, so they can receive orders and execute them without blinking, because they know that their foreign paymasters have a lot of dirt on them. And given that these foreign paymasters also have the tools to put them in jail through their connections in the judiciary, through their levies in the judiciary, then these people that are at the front, at the helm of the Romanian decision making, are very afraid for their liberty and for their hard-earned stolen fortune. So they are excellent executants for whatever orders may come by. So you have Ukraine, who gives the orders and who receives a certain amount of GDP. It is not known the amount, so it is a state secret. The official propaganda machine says that the deficit is not caused by this, that it is caused by pensions and salaries, and the amount given to Ukraine is a state secret because it is too small, even though Ukraine from time to time thanks us for the amazing things that we do for them, and that we all keep secret, and if the public only knew how much you help us, and these kinds of things. And the former Prime Minister of Romania said to the European Commission, to excuse himself for the big deficit, that it's about 3.5% of GDP, which out of a country, out of a budget that collects maybe 35% of the economy, you can imagine it's like 10% of the budget. But this is one mandatory direction. The other one is through the European weapons procurement programs, the SAFE program, for which we borrow funds. There's a lot of procurement done with the United States. So this is the nature of a system which is led by some people who are under blackmail, who are kept there only because they rob the public purse for their foreign benefactors. And you have a media apparatus that not only protects this, but and receives, of course, some perks, some financial perks. And this media apparatus also labels the sovereigntists to be traitors and extremists and beholden to Russian interests. So this is how you get a country that's turned completely upside down, and it is basically a festival of theft. And how will this end up? I have no idea, but it will definitely not turn out well. Unfortunately, Romanians are notoriously good at enduring, so it's hard to imagine that Romanians would actually get together and do some sort of take some sort of collective action of the type that France and Greece does. I would not want to incite to anything, but some other people have more solidarity and have more guts and have more courage. They are more willing to go out into the streets and voice their opposition, and have the people in government be afraid of them. In Romania, the only protests that take place at the behest of the US Embassy and of the so-called civil society that is sponsored by Brussels and sponsored by these American NGOs. And they have colorful placards. They're like a few hundred people, and they go out to support the government. And this is basically the sad state of affairs in Romania. And I cannot predict where this might be going, because I don't know any such example in history where the public purse has been robbed so blindly to such an extent, and an example in which the survival of the actors depends not on how well they govern for the people, but on how well they govern for their foreign paymasters. I do not know such a parallel in history. In a regime that is not exactly a direct military occupation of foreign countries. So when you have the democratic outcome rigged to such an extent, not through the manipulation of the figures, of the voting figures per se, but through what civil society should mean, through what media should entail. So you have this very distorted outcome favoring the foreign agents. They get to run the country, and their survival and their existence depends on continuing to rob it. So the other way around is the incentives should be stacked. Usually when you have a comprador elite, it is brought down by some insurrection in the army, some public protests. For example, I witnessed this in Madagascar in 2009. The president of the country, which was an agent of the Americans, Madagascar had just switched allegiances from France to the United States. It removed French as an official language. It introduced English as an official language, even though nobody spoke English. But that guy was Marco Ravalomanana, is his name. He had been trained in Norway in some Protestant high school, and then he came back to Madagascar to become the oligarch of the dairy industry and also of the cooking oil industry, and I think also of sugar. So very many basic necessities, very essential products, foodstuffs, were monopolized by his company. I think it was called Tico. And he received, of course, Western support. And then his very short stint as president, because he was ousted like in a year and a half, something like this. And I witnessed his oustal. I was there during the so-called Malagasy Revolution. I don't know how you would call it, because since it was not instigated by the USAID, it doesn't have this great name like Revolution of Dignity or whatever. You know, the people who were protesting did not have those USAID hands that they have in all these Eastern European countries at the protests and so on. So what this guy did was he bought a presidential plane. Of course, Madagascar was a country lacking food sovereignty, so it was a net food importer, even though food production was the main economic activity. It was still food deficient, even though that was the main thing that Malagasy people were busy with. And there was some small manufacturing in some free zones, like they tried to emulate the Chinese model with the free zones opened in 1979. But anyway, so Ravalomanana bought a presidential airplane with public funds. And what led to his final oustal was that he leased one half of Madagascar's agricultural land, which amounted to 1/3 of the land surface of the country, to Daewoo, to the South Korean conglomerate, to plant rape for rapeseed oil in order to make biodiesel. And this, of course, led to an uprising, and finally he was ousted. But I'm not sure what could happen in Romania, because Romanian people have this reputation for enduring. As I've said in previous videos, Romania is very different from the countries around, because it had this social stratification that it maintained all the way into modernity. So being Romanian was equivalent to being a serf in the Middle Ages, and the aristocracy was foreign. And in modernity, these aristocrats held on to power, and the majority of the population, the Romanians, kept their serf mentality because they kept on being abused, and they kept on being very harshly exploited. Romania had the last peasant uprising in Europe in 1907, and it also had several of them in the 19th century. And so the Romanians are very used to being heavily exploited. They're very used to having this elite that doesn't care for them, but that acts to serve foreign interests. And the Romanians essentially have no track record of successful rebellion. So in 1907, perhaps, was the last grassroots domestic rebellion. It was crushed very heavily. It was crushed just like in the Middle Ages, even though it took place in the 20th century. It was crushed with the army and even with the artillery. And any regime change afterwards happened as the result of foreign intervention. It was not something domestic. Of course, during communism, the great revolution of emancipation from the bourgeois and aristocratic class was praised, the act of the 23rd of August 1944, but that was actually just the result of the Soviet invasion, and it was not actually a domestic uprising as communist historiography liked to put it. And the same thing happened after 1989. the Soviet putsch, followed by the CIA MI6 attempt at a color revolution, was subsequently described by Romanian historiography, by the present-day Romanian elite, which stems from that class of foreign agents that betrayed the Romanian state in 1989. That event was labeled a revolution, anti-communist uprising and whatever. Even though it took the power from the people, as Romania was governed at the in the interest of the people and through the people and by the people. Well, not exactly. The regime had decayed into a family-type dictatorship that was unable to maintain itself. But anyway, still, there was public property, so we did not have capitalism, and we did not have this huge inequality. And anyway, the Romanians were owners of the wealth of the country, which is no longer the case. But anyway, this event that triggered this regime change is called a revolution, even though it's a counter-revolution, because it took the power from the hands of the many and put it into the hands of the few. And those few were also documented foreign agents, and their children run Romania today. So what happened in 1989 was also not not an uprising. People were completely unaware that the regime would change. I mean, the normal people, because the people in the system knew that the regime would change. There are interviews, very, very informative interviews conducted both with insurrectionists from inside the army, so the Soviet traitors and the British traitors, like the General Atanasie Stănculescu, who had been recruited by the MI6. But also you have interviews with the former heads of the Securitate, who said that Ceausescu became uncooperative towards the end of his regime, and they knew they could not save the regime, so they just had to not fight. It was a non-combat on behalf of the Securitate agents, and as a result, the so-called terrorists had nobody to fight with. They just randomly killed people who were both protesters or military people who had already fraternized with the so-called revolution, because the stage was set to have some sort of civil war. But since the party that protected the state did not engage, then the foreign agents had nobody to shoot. They had just to shoot random members of the public to make it look like as if there was some opposition. But anyway, so this event is labeled by current Romanian historiography as being a revolution and as being for freedom, and the killing of Ceausescu is still regarded legally as a trial, and therefore his accusations are somehow regarded as being legally proven, even though they are preposterous. And so Romanians do not have a track record of rising up for their own interests. There was also this failed color revolution in June 1990. This color revolution instigated by the agents of the Foreign Intelligence Service, this time the Western Intelligence Services, because the pro-Russians were in government. But the so-called liberal civic elite had been successfully co-opted in 1990. In the first months of 1990 by George Soros and by the U.S. Embassy and embassies of the Western European countries, and their agents managed to successfully engineer this so-called civic protest of the intellectuals, whatever, that wanted to reverse the outcome of the first democratically held elections that gave a landslide victory to basically the Soviet agents. And so that was also not organic. There were subsequent color revolution attempts against the Social Democrats when they were somehow sovereigntist. But yeah, Romanians have a very good track record of enduring and a very poor track record of opposition. So even after having their elections annulled on bogus charges, just because a sovereigntist would have won, even then the Romanians did not rebel. I was also one of the people who went on these protest marches, but they had very little press coverage. We were hundreds of thousands of people marching through Bucharest, and the media said that we were maybe 5,000 or something like this. So yeah, it's a bleak future ahead, and I cannot think of any outcome except to have this further dissolution of the state, until maybe, I don't know, some foreign element intervenes and puts us on the right path. Maybe another Ukrainian false flag attack, but this time one that actually succeeds, and then all our dilemmas are gone because we start militarizing and do conscription, and war is always a good means to escape an economic crisis, as the Americans can testify with how they exited the Great Depression. It was the New Deal that Roosevelt brought about, but even more so was the militarization of the economy, because you have to do Keynesian interventionism, but why make people just dig holes and create public parks when you can make them create weapons and conquer some territory? So have some return in the end. Have state procurement directed towards defeating geopolitical rivals, towards gaining new markets, gaining new resources, and so on. So I have no idea how the Romanian suicidal adventure will end. But as I like to say, as long as people like it, at least somebody's enjoying it, So at least the people who voted for the current governmental coalition and the people who voted for the president of Romania, for this current president, at least they're enjoying it, or at least I hope they're enjoying it, because they should. It's like we're all adults, we're all responsible for what we do, we're all responsible for the votes we cast. So when you elect people who rob you blind and who function at the behest of foreign interests and who tell you this during the campaign, who tell you that this will be their priority, and you are a willing participant, you are a cooperating victim, then I guess you have no victimhood rights. You don't have the right to cry over it. We are adults. We are vaccinated, or some of us are. the part that voted for the current government and for the current president surely is. So actions have consequences. There are all sorts of things that we forgot to learn. There are all these lessons that used to be passed on through the wisdom of the elders, and somehow the chain stopped. Somehow these lessons are no longer learned. The fact that beating hurts, the fact that war is bad, all sorts of lessons, life lessons that our elders used to teach us, and there's all of this wisdom that used to be passed down from generation to generation, and it stopped being passed down, and now people go out and vote and put the stamp on the ballot, being completely clueless about what they are doing. But apparently we call this democracy, and it's the majority that gets its way. So, the people of Romania are getting exactly what they signed up for, willingly or knowingly or unknowingly, because we cannot speak of willingly or unwillingly with, as I said, vaccinated adults. We all we have full capacity in front of the law, so therefore we are fully responsible for our decisions. This is what I wanted to tell you today. If you like what I do, like, share, subscribe. If you want to support my work, you'll find the link in the channel description how to support me financially. And until next time, take care.